Well, thank you all for attending tonight's presentation on Troy's urban forestry or Troy's inventory and management plan. Earlier this year, we put out a request for pricing. We received responses from 4 qualified firms, and the lowest pricing was from Planet Geo, and they certainly presented nothing but the highest quality in the preparation of the inventory as well as the management plan. And one of the things I need to keep restating on this is this cost the city absolutely zero. It was 100% funded by New York State, and I'm going to read it, by the New York State Environmental Protection Fund and administered by the Urban and Community Forestry Program within the Department of Environmental Conservation, Division of Land and Forests. So again, we have Planet Geo here. I have Chris Pfeiffer, who's going to talk a little bit about the project, but the importance of these 2 components certainly can't be understated or can't be overstated. We have an inventory that allows the city to know where the trees are, what the species are, and allows us to mobilize when there's invasive species threats or to get ahead of management needs instead of reacting. So it's reacting after there's a tree emergency or damage or something. So it allows us to get out ahead of that and save costs there. And then it creates a management plan that helps not only the city departments know what to where to apply their resources. It helps developers know what the city's looking for new tree canopy, and it helps the Planning Commission guide that as well. But most importantly, having both the management plan and the inventory complete aligns us for some funding that will be out in the very near future from the Department of Environmental Conservation for maintenance funds. And as Chris is going to explain, we have a great need for maintenance of trees that are already existing here. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Chris Pfeiffer, Planet Geo's Director of Urban Forestry. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight to hear the presentation about Troy's community forest. And as Steve mentioned, it's looking at the inventory data that we collected and the plan to address maintenance and planting and removal needs. My name again is Chris Pfeiffer with Planet Geo. I'm Director of Urban Forestry Consulting, and I was the project manager specifically for the management plan, and I oversaw the tree inventory project as it was conducted. And so just wanted to recognize the city and Planet Geo's support staff that was involved with the inventory and the management project. So we're looking at Director of Field Operations with Planet Geo and Geographic Information System or GIS technicians and support to really tie together the data into meaningful information. And also just on the slide looking at recognizing other folks involved in the planning process, from laying out the strategy for inventorying across the entire city to the consultations to identify specific needs for the city of Troy. And as Steve mentioned, it's supported by Department of Environmental Conservation through a grant to conduct the inventory and the management plan. And keeping in mind, this information is used to inform future maintenance, preventative, and also addressing removals and critical pruning needs. So just to give you a high-level overview of tonight's presentation, just want to do a brief introduction of why I care about the community forest, or as sometimes referred to as the urban forest. So we're going to look at just some overview of the benefits of trees provided to the residents of Troy. And then I want to just touch on the basic overview of the project itself, again, looking at the inventory and then the management plan. Then we're going to take a look at the results from analyzing the inventory data to come up with the maintenance schedules and proposed budget to conduct this maintenance, and also looking at some program recommendations in terms of staffing levels, community outreach, looking at how to address service requests for tree removals and pruning for clearance. And then going to talk about 4 key strategies or action strategies. They're the overarching goals that are laid out in the plan, and just going to present those at a high level. And this presentation is as an introduction. So any kind of questions about what's involved with the strategies or the recommendations, we'll have plenty of time for the open discussion. And then I'll wrap everything up with closing remarks. So again, if you have an immediate question, feel free to raise your hand or save it to the end, and we'll address. A copy of the presentation will be available. Additional resources are there on the seat if you haven't grabbed them yet, or in the back. And yeah, if any questions, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So again, thank you all for joining tonight, and we'll get started. But first, I want to set the tone of the meeting with why plan and care for a community or urban forest. And this is a quote by Jim Clark, who was a former associate professor at the University of Washington. And he said, urban trees and forests are considered integral to the sustainability of cities as a whole. Yet sustainable urban forests are not born, they are made. They do not arise at random, but result from community-wide commitment to their creation and management. So simply stated, the trees that are there had to be planned, had to be paid for, have to be maintained. And this effort looks at inventorying those trees and planning for the care of the existing and future urban forest. So when we talk about urban and community forests, sometimes it raises eyebrows, what is an urban forest? And when we're talking about this for the city of Troy, we're looking at this citywide. And so this is looking at nature parks, it's looking at waterfront trails, the trees along there. It's looking at institutions and colleges and the trees that are on campus. It's also looking at the residential trees, trees in the front rights of way, but also the backyard trees. We're looking at trees in parks, trees that create recreational settings or places of open recreation, and also the downtown areas. And trees are considered part of the infrastructure. So they're planted in streetscapes to conduct and to provide the ecosystem services that I'll describe in the next few slides. So the inventory looked specifically at trees on public property, but the management plan through the community outreach recommendations looks at the big picture of caring for the urban forest. And when we talk about benefits of trees, there are a variety of benefits that trees provide. Some we instinctively feel when we go outside, that restorative effect or the sense of well-being and community that trees create in a harsh urban environment, sometimes harsh. I'm more talking about the harsh environment for trees. But then also looking at the services they provide. And the tree canopy, such as rainy days today, is capturing precipitation, preventing it from going into the system. So that's either volumes of water that the city doesn't have to treat and maintain, or that's volumes of water that doesn't go right into a spillway or into a water body. Then we look at how trees shade in the summertime, reducing energy costs, or they block the wind in the wintertime so that they're reducing the heating costs. A variety of benefits. And then the overall aesthetics of trees. They bloom, the fall color, that adds to the property values. And fortunately, there's been research conducted by the U.S. Forest Service, cooperative extensions, other agencies and institutions to quantify these benefits. And then when we look at Troy's urban forest specifically, the handout that I gave you has the actual values that are based on the street trees inventoried as part of this project. And so that take-home message is that there's a reason why we care and increase tree cover throughout cities because of those benefits. And so we're able to quantify them. And we can also forecast future benefits. If we plant, say, 60 to 100 trees per year, what's that going to look like and what's that going to feel like in the city of Troy? So we're able to quantify that. So that's some background on some of the reasons why we conduct inventories and plan for the urban forests. There are also other concerns where you want to look at equitable distribution of canopy, so that way you're providing benefits citywide. And you also want to look at concerns of pest and disease, and you want to look at any kinds of climate change and how that affects the urban forest. So there are a lot of factors that play when assessing and creating a management plan for the community forest. First, we'll take a look at the street and park tree inventory. So not only did that include the trees, it also included possible planting sites. And I want to mention that these are just possible. They're not planting sites that are going to be stocked in the next 5 to 7 years. These are just available data to the city when applying for grants to look at areas that may be potential for tree plantings. So then you want to look at the species diversity, the size classes of trees to know where these planting places can be stocked. So in total, 14,132 points were plotted on the city's tree management software. And I'll have some screenshots of that. But that's going on the ground, either in the street rights of way or in parks. There's 14 pocket parks and the 4 major parks also in the city of Troy that were inventoried. And so of the over 14,000 points, 10,000 of those were actual street trees. And then we'll get into some more detail, but over 7,000 are live trees. And then we look at the park trees, and we're looking at over 3,300 park trees in maintained areas. And then to get more into an overview of the inventory itself, International Society of Arboriculture certified arborists and tree risk assessment qualified staff were out in the field with tablets using the inventory management program. So they'd go up to the tree, plot it, and you'd get the spatial information, the latitude and longitude of that location of the tree. Once you plot that point, you can identify the species, looking at the condition, get a measurement of the size of the tree, and also apply a maintenance recommendation. And I want to touch on the maintenance part because some of the summaries talk about that. So when we look at the maintenance recommendation, there's priority 1, which is critical, and then there's priority 2, which is immediate. And both of these look at what type of priority is it? Is it a priority 1 removal, or is it a priority 1 prune? So maybe a broken branch is in the canopy and it needs to be addressed because it's above a sidewalk or it's above where cars parked. And then we look at just general maintenance needs. Does the tree need clearance away from the sidewalks so pedestrians can walk? Does it need structural pruning just to give it a better shape and overall better health of the tree? And that was done for every single tree, over 10,000 trees throughout the city. And again, to make up the difference there, those are the potential planting sites that can be used and tracked throughout the community forestry program's efforts. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that this started in May of this year, and then we wrapped up the final tree data collection in August of this year. So now I just want to give an overview of the management plan, and we call this the Community Forest Management Plan. And as far as the process for putting together the plan, it involved an extensive process of an existing conditions and operations audit. And that takes a look at all elements and categories and themes of urban and community forestry, from the management program, funding, budget, staffing levels, looking at equipment, pest and disease resilience, climate change, a variety of factors that we take into account when we do this operations audit. A large part of the project for the management plan was to conduct an analysis of the inventory data. And I just wanted to show just an example that there's systematic approaches to analyzing a community forestry program. And so we applied the U.S. Forest Service's Urban Forest Sustainability and Management Audit, as well as the criteria and indicators for urban forest management plan priorities to looking at routine pruning cycles. And here's a slide to show a summary of the inventory data. Again, yes, go ahead.
Sorry.
No problem.
What's the definition of a vacant site?
Yeah, good point.
Site versus pre-existing site, how does it get determined?
Yeah, so we're looking at width of the available planting site, so how much rooting space there is, the distance from intersections, no overhead utilities, no observed underground utilities, and then it's a potential planting site. So then it's like tier one of plotting a point that could potentially hold a tree. Then you want to look at the space to identify the proper species for the site, and also look at the existing trees on that city block or stretch of road to help inform when and also what species.
Does the overhead utility discount the site, or is it still eligible, supposed to be in conformance with like National Grid guidelines for street trees?
Right, it doesn't disqualify the site. We look at when there's a field in the inventory that says presence of wires. It's a planting site and has presence of wires. You want to start to look at your smaller statured trees and ones that won't be a recurring nuisance where they have to be pruned hard. Yep, because we don't want to exclude those sites from planting. There's still good opportunity, that diversity and structure of your bulls. And that's looking at, potential pest and disease issues where they could potentially wipe out an entire species. So that's addressed in the plan. It's really impressive to see 182 unique species, but there is a concern for the diversity. So that, again, that's addressed. Of the inventory population, 27% are in the 12 to 18 inch diameter range. So that comes to an average of about 14.3 inches across the city, your average tree size. And the largest tree recorded was 67 inches in diameter. And then I also wanted to note highlights from the inventory. 42% of the tree population is in good condition. And there's 3 or 4 other categories. So it's the majority of the tree population as good. So, and there's things that are involved when considering a tree good. You're looking at the roots. All things that I want to note is that, remember I said about the priorities? Well, there's 140 priority ones. So that could be priority 1 removals or priority 1 pruning. And there's 115 priority 1 removals. And we'll get into some more details. But these are the high level stats, the key figures from the analysis. So a little bit on the ecosystem benefits, and just referring back to that image that we can quantify what the tree population is providing in terms of ecosystem services and benefits. And now looking at the table, we're able to summarize the aesthetics or property value of the entire tree population, and also look at stormwater in terms of dollars saved and the quantity. So when you look at this, these are taking regional estimates. I wouldn't hold it down to the nearest dollar, but it's a good idea to show that the benefits that tree canopy provides in terms of reduced management of that stormwater volume. And then you look at carbon sequestration and storage. And, we talk about climate change and the issues there. Troy's urban forests contribute to the reduction of global warming because of sequestering and storing carbon. Also, I mentioned about energy savings. You can see the values there in the table. And then we look at overall air quality improvements from pulling in actual pollutants through the physiology of the trees to capturing particles and dust, so reducing asthma issues and cleaning the air. Now this table gets busy, but it's to show that there was a comprehensive analysis of the ecosystem benefits for the trees in Troy. And we look at the most common species. And when we start to look at the breakdown of it, we have the percentage of trees that make up the rights of way, the area between the road and the sidewalk. And 19 to 20%, again, are Norway maples. And you'll see how that affects the numbers as I advance these slides. But on this section, we look at those ecosystem benefits again. And based on the quantity of trees, for the top, however many here, 12 much they provide on average per tree. And then we look at down here with the pin oak providing some of the larger benefits. And that's because of their larger stature. They grow to a larger size, and overall they are great trees in the urban forest. One thing to note is that Calorie Pair is high on the list for abundance, but looking at the table, considerably low in terms of benefits. And that's because they don't provide as much value to the city in terms of ecosystem benefits. They have some benefits with their flowering, but poor structure, and they're prone to other issues as well. And so here the data tells us what we've already know as urban foresters. And lastly, looking at the importance values and the replacement values and the relative performance index. And this is where we get into informing species selection for tree plantings. One thing to note, Norway maple, there's a large number of them. So that means that they're important to the overall community forest. That's not to say that they're beneficial, but to lose all Norway maples, it has a high importance value. So you address that in terms of looking at potential pests and diseases, proper tree maintenance to maintain the canopy and health of the trees, routine monitoring, because they may not be favorable trees overall, but they are important when you look at their contribution to the community forest. And I'm sorry, I'm having to lean, but that's the key message there. But also green ash is on the list, and we'll get into a little bit, and it's in the plan. There's a pest that's an issue for all fraxinus or ash trees, emerald ash borer. And it's top of the list as the most common tree. It's providing benefits, and it has importance values, but it's at risk. So looking at a maintenance strategy to address that. And the city does have an emerald ash borer plan. So in the management plan, it does look at how to apply that plan more specifically for this area of concern. So now I want to get specifically into the maintenance needs, because as we analyze the inventory and develop the community forest management plan, this was our primary focus, was to look at the data and provide a recommended maintenance schedule and provide the removal priorities. So there's a lot of detail in the data that is summarized just in this slide here. So any questions you have about this, feel free to ask when we open it up for open discussion, or follow up afterwards, because we have different data on the age distribution, size, what this data all means, and what are the costs that are going to be applied here if you conduct this maintenance. So this summary here looks at the management or maintenance activity, and we'll start at the top, and we're looking at removals. So that priority 1 and priority 2, the critical and immediate, there are 476 that are identified as priority 1 or 2 for removal. And of those 476, 115 are critical removals. So that may mean that there's a lot of rot or decay and the tree's looking like it's ready to fail, or large limbs that are dead where the overall tree is dying back and it could be of concern. And then we look at immediates where it didn't meet that threshold of critical, but it should be addressed in years 1 through 3 if possible. And there's 361 of those. And then we look at, yes, go ahead. No problem.
For an immediate removal, is it the intent to have an immediate replacement so that you have no net loss of street tree?
Yep. Yeah, thanks for that. That's a good question. The planting recommendations at the bottom of the table look at just addressing the removals. There's the 68 trees, which look at over a 7-year recommended maintenance schedule to plant 68 per year. And that would address the trees that are removed. It's not a robust planting strategy, but it's minimal recommendation. To address the removals, percentage of natural mortality or trees that reach senescence, we're using industry standards and estimates to come up with about 160 trees per year that is recommended to break over that threshold into more of a 2-to-1 ratio, planting to removal. So overall, we're being more energetic with saying 200 trees per year is recommended. And that's to achieve goals in the comprehensive plan, Realize Troy. That's to enhance ecosystem benefits, overall equitable distribution of canopy and those benefits. And you'll see also looking at the structure of trees. Overall, most of the trees are in the 12 to 18 inch range. When you look at what's recommended for an urban forest of this size, we want to have more of the 0 to 6 inch trees than we currently have in Troy. Right now, there's 18% that are 0 to 6 inches in size, street and park trees. We need to look at more of 40%. So that's where we say 200 trees helps to achieve that structure of the age and size classes. And that's, yep, thank you. And that's to look at also the benefits. You lose a large tree, you need smaller trees and more of them to not compensate, but to pick up what is lost from a tree that had to be removed. Then we look at the routine pruning cycles. Yes, in the back.
Sorry, are there any cost assessments done
There are, yep.
for them to do that?
Yep. So the question was, are there any costs associated with these recommended maintenance activities? Yes. And I have to see if it's on the slide, but I do have a handout that I didn't put out where it lists every activity and costs per year. And it's also in the management plan. So I'll be sure to pull that out for folks interested in looking at the actual numbers. So once we look at addressing the priorities, you know, the priority 1 and 2 removals and pruning, we want to start to look at routine maintenance of the street and park trees across the city so that we don't get a surge of removals because maybe something was missed in terms of a pest or just a declining population of trees, because Troy's urban forest is of a lot more mature trees. So we want routine maintenance cycles to conduct the maintenance of cleaning for dead and diseased branches, you know, shaping and doing the routine pruning. And with that, when you remove the trees that are less than 6 inches and you look at only live trees not recommended for removal, we're left with 5,252 trees. So overall, an industry standard and based on this population of trees, we recommend a 7-year routine pruning cycle for street trees. So those 5,200 trees over 7 years, we're looking at approximately 750 trees per year to be routinely maintained. And these might be larger trees where you need a bucket truck or a climbing crew, a professional arborist. But we look at addressing this at year 3. This isn't something that we're going to start on tomorrow, but you know, addressing those priorities and then start to use this information in the plan to help build the case for why it's important to conduct routine maintenance. And to simplify things, we separated the park trees. So there's, we're looking at 2,280 live park trees greater than 6 inches. Over a 7-year period, starting at year 3, we're looking at 326 trees per year. And that was broken up because street tree maintenance and park tree maintenance tends to be different in how it's applied and how you set that rotation. And then looking at trees less than 6 inches, we're at 1,204 trees. And if you split that over a 3-year recommended pruning cycle, because young trees grow faster, it's approximately 400 trees per year. And it's really important to get onto the young tree training because you create better sound structured trees so that it reduces future maintenance costs. You can do preventative maintenance by structurally pruning the tree so it's not an issue when you would need a bucket truck. And there may be citizen pruners or volunteers that can be trained to properly prune those 400 trees per year. And last thing is to touch on the tree planting again. Based on the number of priority removals, we're looking at a bare minimum of about 68 to 70 trees per year to address that no net loss. But for the reasons stated, we're looking at a recommendation of around more around 200 trees per year. And this just goes into the costs per activity. So again, this is a handout, and Won't get into detail here, but here's your activity. Priority 1, removals. Priority 2, removals. Here's your year, diameter class, estimated costs, and then split these priorities over 3 years. And then you can come up with a total cost per activity, and then an overall cost, estimated cost for the whole maintenance program and recommendations. So again, I do have this as a handout, and some of these numbers are estimates. So, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at. And so this also includes the routine pruning of street and park trees, as well as the young tree pruning and the planting. Yes?
So when you're replacing a tree, do these costs, is it just strictly removing a tree, grinding the stump, all of that? Because what about tree pits that have upheaved sidewalks because of the previous root system and stuff? Is that incorporated into the cost, or that's something separate?
So the question was, are the costs including costs of infrastructure damage like sidewalk upheaval? Short answer is no. It just looks at the tree. But in the management plan, we created what's called a decision matrix for addressing tree and sidewalk conflicts. And also in the plan, there are resources to look at amendments to the sidewalk, amendments to the roots, looking at also alternatives to just removing the tree and putting in new sidewalk. So we don't want it to be, there's an issue with a sidewalk, automatic answer is to remove the tree. We provide an approach to look at the tree, the site, and the sidewalk or other infrastructure. So those costs aren't included in here, but we provide guidance on how to address those, because those are issues, especially with a city with a mature tree canopy, larger trees and minimal growing spaces in some conditions. So thanks for the question. Part of the planting strategy is to look at the minimal soil volume for root growth, also looking at a variety of other factors so that we don't have these future issues. As a resource after this meeting so that it can be referred back to rather than digging into the plan. It provides a summary of each maintenance activity on the left here, and then a yearly estimated cost if these maintenance recommendations were implemented. And you can get down to the grand total here at the bottom with 2.4 million. Now, again, this is spread over a 7-year span, and this is implementing the best measures for maintenance and planting of the urban forest. At bare minimum, we recommend addressing the critical and immediate removals and pruning. And as Steve mentioned, there's New York DEC grants available for maintenance. And so we can help the city with putting together a grant application showing we use certified arborists to identify critical maintenance needs. Here are our priorities. So that's part of the effort here, not just writing a plan and walking away, but helping with getting started on this maintenance recommendation. I'm just going to wrap up a few things because that's a heavy topic. We're talking about maintenance. So I want to end on a light note that the management plan does really consider looking at existing community outreach and also opportunities. And so, there are a lot of great things going on in Troy with different activities with, and I just do some call outs with the Downtown Troy Business Improvement District, Capital Roots, the Street Tree Advisory Board, looking at the colleges and cooperative extensions. And there's a lot of great efforts. And what the plan does is tie these things together and also look at opportunities. But also when you talk about community engagement, there are some key factors that we want to look at, and they're addressed in the next slide. But here are some recommendations just overall. It's like you had an inventory done. There's some great data in there, not just on removals and pruning needs, but also the benefits. So we recommend, sharing that with the community. The tree inventory management software, if you have an account with Tree Plotter, you can get into the weeds and really manage the data. But if you are a public user, we recommend having it available so that folks can see what is that tree out in front of their yard, in front of their sidewalk, and looking at different things. What are the benefits that these trees are providing? So we recommend things like that, and just keeping information current, keeping your tree inventory current, and looking at different opportunities for community engagement. Some of the heavier topics within community engagement, is looking at when the community makes requests for tree services to the city. So looking at it's the city's responsibility for tree maintenance and removal in the rights of way. But so there's a system in place where an adjacent property owner or concerned citizen can create a service request online for the city to evaluate. And overall, looking at the process currently in place, we recommend a more thorough evaluation process for considering trees that need to be removed or trees in question. And that brings up the decision matrix that I looked at, that I mentioned earlier. And also just different recommendations with an improved tree removal and tree service request process is we're looking at better tracking and reporting using that tree inventory software, and also looking at enhancing partnerships and that outreach to show why keeping trees is a benefit if it isn't a public risk and it's not damaging infrastructure. If it is damaging infrastructure, again, there's that resource in the plan to look at different amendments, whether it be to the tree, to the roots themselves, or sidewalk amendments. Another recommendation that we look at in the plan is that maintenance schedule for young trees, for routine of trees greater than 6 inches, and the removals. It's a lot of demand on the city, and looking at current staffing levels and budgets, there might be a shortage. So what we're recommending is looking at priority corridors, using volunteers like citizen pruners as much as possible that are trained for the young tree maintenance, and also prioritizing what the city can do in terms of staffing and budget in priority corridors. So we're looking at pedestrian and vehicle traffic levels. We're looking at the tree inventory itself. So where's the density or concentration of maintenance needs? And looking at the roadways themselves, major arterials, side roads, prioritizing and doing what you can with what you have. And overall, it is recommended that the city evaluate a shared maintenance responsibility by looking again with volunteers, citizen pruners, looking at business improvement district opportunities, neighborhood associations. Troy has a lot of those. And, using this information from the plan to help build that support. And maybe they won't be directly doing the maintenance, but they can help to find avenues for grant funding beyond just the DEC with the state. Lastly, to tie everything together with the inventory and the maintenance recommendations, the community outreach, the existing community forestry program here with the city, we have 4 action strategies. And before I get into detail, just wanted to state that these are in the plan. They're also in the executive summary that's printed. So I just at a high level state that action strategy 1 is to maximize the efficiencies in maintaining trees. The next action strategy looks at use planning, legislation, and enforcement to integrate trees more fully. And then the third action strategy is to implement best management practices for the health and benefits of trees. And then the fourth one is to look at extending the fostering of community engagement. So foster community stewardship. So that's the overarching 4 goals, but within each of those are recommendations. And at a high level, each of these slides provide the recommendations, but in the plan itself, it gets into detail about how to implement these recommendations, and also a suggested timetable from 2019 to 2026. And again, that's all in the plan, but I wanted to keep this concise so that we can talk more about the maintenance recommendations and any questions you have. So I'll just go through these few slides slowly. And then here we're on the last two action strategies. Again, with implementing best management practices for the health and benefits of trees and to foster community engagement. And then here's just a screenshot of the timetable looking at the action item per strategy, and then the potential collaborators, the implementation or the action year, and general notes. And these are all available in the management plan. And with that, I want to open it up to all of you with any questions or comments you have. And I can flip back to specific slides if you have questions or want to see information again. So I thank you, everyone. Yes?
Who updates the inventory?
That's a good question. So that's
At least like 10 new trees that went in across the street within the last week.
Yeah, the inventory can be outdated as soon as it's collected. And so that's one of the recommendations in the plan is to have a designated staff and a workflow for the planting and the maintaining and upkeep of the database. And maybe Steve could answer to that question better, but that's a good point.
And I would say that that's the part we're looking at right now. We obviously have different departments that do removals. We have to coordinate with capital roots and bid on when trees get planted. So we have to work on really implementing the strategy to make sure that that's interactive and have we can keep it updated. So that is a challenge, and we recognize that.
When on the website, there's a login, so making sure administrative.
Yeah, So I'll say the management plan, if you would like to look at it right now, if you go to the city's website, you go to the Department of Development, and there's a sidebar that says Library of Studies that we're starting right now. So all these studies now, and going back a number of years, we're putting them all there. And so the draft plan is there, and I will have Danae add under it a link to the inventory. It's pretty easy. It's real easy to use. You can just click on it, you just zoom in. It's like using Google Maps, and actually I think that's the underlying feature. You can zoom in, you can see the street view, so we don't have to update street view. Obviously, it won't always be correct, but if you go, but again, we have to start planning a strategy now to make sure that we can update them.
But to that point, who has access? Will Capital Roots and Bid directly be able to add data to it, or does they have to do it?
It will all come through the city, so right now the Department of Development has it, and we'll be working with the Office of General Services as well to make sure that they can update it as projects are undertaken. Yeah, there's a great picture of it right there. You zoom in, it takes just a second to update. Is that the actual live or is that screenshots?
It's live, but I'm not sure of the internet speed, but and we may need to do a login, but this gives you an idea of what the public can see, and we can adjust this too so that maybe you want them to see more data, but generally we keep it to like the species and the size because we don't want to get into priorities. But if you have a question, you can say, hey, this tree, tree ID number, whatever, or the tree at this specific address, when do you plan to do the clearance, or when it's looking kind of unhealthy, can you come and inspect it? So that ties into the service request recommendations in the plan is now they can pull up this specific tree, see what maintenance history was done to it, any kind of monitoring, any kind of concern, pictures, and have a better informed answer, and then go out and look at the tree specifically. So I can't tell if we're logged in or not, but here gives you an idea. Without a login, you have different options for what you want to display the data by. Right now, it's a colorful map showing the species diversity. Again, 182 different species. So we can get down to where are our biggest trees. And then I'm at a bad angle here and it's too far away to see, so bear with me. But this gives you an idea. In parentheses, it gives you the count of the number of trees in that size class. And a lot of the inventory analysis, we looked at street trees and park trees separately, but also a comprehensive analysis. And there's ways to do that with this as well. So maybe you just want to look at street trees. And right now we're looking at citywide street and park trees. So then when you narrow it down to what you want, we also have the advanced filter where you can really get into when was it planted, what kind of tree, the size of tree, the condition, and narrow it down in a series of queries like that. It's an online GIS to do all sorts of different analyses. Yes?
I noticed that you get some 184 American elms existing.
Yeah,
Where are they located?
that's a good,
And I'm gonna, I guess, ask, because we're gonna have to start wrapping up because there's a city council meeting in about 14 minutes or so. So a couple things I would say, there's different levels of administration. Certainly if you wanna see more than you're available to, you can come in and we can, you can look on site, you can come up to the city hall and we can share that with you. We'll probably add some layers in so that maybe people like Capital Roots who are active in tree planting can get a little more, or the bid, you get a little more detail on what they need.
and you also tie in species. So what trees are doing well in narrow planting widths, and that helps to inform future plantings. And as part of the plan, it's recommended to have a tree planting plan established. So using these possible planting sites, the data like the grow space type, species diversity, age structure, to develop a plan that when you do get grant funding for planting or from another source, where are these trees going to go and what type?
Is
We're
the,
gonna take one more question and then we're gonna have to, okay. Chris is gonna be here afterwards, so if you want to ask some questions, you can certainly do that. Peter, you have one last question?
Any recommendation in the plan for establishing a nursery for the city for all these trees that we're going to plant over the next 7 or whatever years?
There's no recommendation currently, but there's case studies that touch on that a bit in the plan. And that's something it's a great idea. A lot of cities are doing that to meet the demands and goals of tree canopy increase.
Okay. Thank you, Chris, for a
right.
great presentation.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.